Welcome to the Make.com Essentials series, a video series where we break down key concepts and basic modules focusing on content automation. In this tutorial, we'll explore the HTTP request module, one of the most powerful tools in automation. It allows you to send and receive data from almost any online service, acting as a universal connector when no built-in module exists, and is widely used to integrate with APIs. To make this concept practical, we'll use Luma Labs API to generate a video. Since Make.com doesn't have a direct module for Luma AI, we'll use an HTTP request to communicate with their API. With this example, you'll be able to apply the same approach to any other API you want to work with. Without further ado, let's jump into the tutorial. The HTTP request module is a tool that allows you to interact with external services by sending and receiving data over the HTTP. This module is essential for connecting to APIs, enabling Make.com to communicate with systems that don't have built-in integrations. At its core, the HTTP request module acts as a bridge between Make.com and external applications. It allows you to send requests to APIs to retrieve or send data, authenticate and interact with secured services using API keys, tokens, or other authentication methods, structure and process responses in various formats like JSON or XML. But what does API mean? API stands for Application Programming Interface, is a set of rules that allows different software applications to communicate. Think of an API as a messenger between you and a service. You send a request, like ordering a meal at a restaurant, the service processes it, the kitchen prepares the food, and the API delivers the response. The waiter brings your meal. Just like a restaurant menu defines what you can order, an API specifies what requests you can make and what responses you will receive. Before we continue, we've created this series to help you master content automation for social media, faceless channels, and more. We're also launching our school community, where you'll find full courses on Make, Create-O-Mate, Airtable, and other automation tools. Join the waiting list now and be the first to access it. Link in the description. To fully understand how an HTTP request works, it's helpful to compare it to a restaurant ordering process. Just like placing an order in a restaurant involves specific steps, sending a request to an API follows a structured format. Let's break it down. 1. Method, the request type. What are you asking for? In a restaurant, you tell the waiter whether you want to order a meal or ask for the bill. Similarly, an HTTP request uses different methods based on what you need. The most common methods are GET and POST. Let's see what each one does. GET, like asking for a menu item that already exists. Example, I'd like a cheeseburger. In APIs, this means retrieving existing data, such as checking the weather. POST, like requesting a custom meal. Example, can you make a special pasta with extra cheese? In APIs, this means sending new data to be processed, like uploading an image to generate a video. In Luma Labs API, since we are generating a video, we need to use a POST request because we are sending an image that will be processed into a video. 2. URL, known as the endpoint. Where is your order going? In a restaurant, your order goes to the kitchen, not the cashier or another table. In an API request, the URL is the exact address where your request is sent. In Luma Labs API, the request URL looks like this. 3. Headers, defining authentication and additional information. Requests contain metadata about the request itself. They provide essential information that helps the server understand and process the request correctly. One of the most common uses of headers is authentication. Many APIs require an API key or other credentials to verify that the request is coming from an authorized user. This is usually done by including an authorization header. In Luma Labs, for example, to authenticate our request, we need to add an authorization header that looks like this. This tells the API that we are a registered user with permission to access the service. Headers can also define content type, specifying the format of the data being sent or received. For example, if we are sending JSON data, we include. This informs the server that the request body contains JSON formatted data, ensuring it is interpreted correctly. Don't worry if this part doesn't make sense right now. We'll go over it in detail later. 4. Body, customizing your order. If you're ordering pizza, you might specify toppings, crust type, and size. Similarly, in an API request, the body contains details about what you want. In Luma Labs API, the body must include an image URL, the animation style, and the video duration, as shown in this example. Here, you can see that on one side, we have the parameter name, such as image URL, and next to it, the value we want to use. In this case, the actual image URL. Each API's documentation specifies the parameters you can use to request or send information, defining how the interaction with the service works. 5. Response, receiving your order. Once the kitchen finishes your meal, the waiter brings it back to you. In an API request, once the service processes your request, it responds with the result, usually in JSON format. In Luma Labs API, the response shows a status confirming if the request was successful and a video or URL with the final product. This is the result, the URL to download the generated video, like receiving your meal at the table. If you've learned something valuable so far, don't forget to subscribe. We post weekly tutorials on essential concepts to help you get started with content automation. Now let's see a practical example of how to correctly use the HTTP request module in Make.com to interact with Luma Labs API and generate a video. Step 1. Get your API key from Luma Labs. Go to Luma Labs API documentation and create an account if you haven't already. Navigate to the API key section and generate a key. Use the name you want. Copy the API key and store it in a safe place for now. This will be used for authentication in our request. Remember to purchase some credits in your Luma account. $5 is enough for testing. Step 2. Set up the HTTP request module in Make.com. Open Make.com and create a new scenario. Click the plus button and add the HTTP request module. Choose Post as the request type, since we are sending data to generate a video. In the URL field, enter Luma Labs API endpoint. To find this URL, go to Luma Labs API documentation. Expand the API section and select Video Generation. In the left menu, look for Image to Video and click on it. In this section, you will find and copy the URL where we will send the request. Step 3. Configure the headers, authentication and content type. Click Add a header and enter the required values. For the name, copy the value from the API documentation. For the value, copy the corresponding value, but replace it with your own API key. Now, I will enter my API key and, of course, I will revoke it before uploading this tutorial. Remember, this is a personal key. Never share it with anyone, especially since you'll be adding funds to the service. In body type, select raw. For content type, since we are working with JSON, select application JSON as specified in Luma Labs documentation. Step 4. Define the body. Request payload. Enter the request data based on Luma Labs API documentation, so copy and paste the entire JSON object. Make sure to select everything inside the curly brackets and paste the text into the request content field. Replace image URL with the actual image you want to animate. For now, I'll use the example image provided. I'll leave the prompt as it is, but you can experiment with different options. The most important thing right now is to verify that we have successfully connected to Luma Labs' API. Finally, select Parse Response. Yes to get a response that is easy for us to read. Step 5. Run the request and retrieve the response. Save the module settings. Click Run once to execute the request. Check the output. A status 201 means everything ran successfully. In the response, the most important part is the product ID of the video request. This ID will be used in the next HTTP module to ask Luma's API for the final video URL. Step 6. Request the project URL using the ID provided by the API. Clone the existing HTTP request module. Change the method to GET, since we are now requesting information from the API. In the API documentation, look for Get Generation with ID. Configure the HTTP request as explained in the documentation. After the URL, add a slash, followed by the ID obtained from the previous request. Create a new header and copy the required values. Delete the request content, then save the changes. Run the module, and we should receive the URL of the generated product, which in this case is the video of the tiger. And that's it. Now you can use any API service with a solid understanding of the basics of how to configure it. Remember, APIs provide a lot more information that can be used for different applications. Also, keep in mind that you'll need the HTTP module whenever Make.com doesn't have a built-in integration. Even if a module exists, it might not cover all the options you need, in which case the HTTP module can be a great alternative. Finally, if you find API documentation confusing or aren't sure how to structure your request, you can ask ChatGPT for help. Simply provide the documentation link and a screenshot of your HTTP request setup in Make.com, and it will guide you on how to fill it out correctly. Don't miss future tutorials. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.